Well, hello, everybody. It's good to be back. I'm sorry that I was gone the last time. I got sick before everybody got sick, so gratefully healthy now. But my name is Kim Buck, and I have been working on this or doing this Prodependence webinar now for several months, and also working with Dr. Rob on spreading prodependence, so to speak, and getting it out there into the world and having a new treatment paradigm for families and loved ones and people who are struggling or in relationship to somebody who has addiction or other chronic kind of mental or emotional issues. So I work in Arizona at an agency. I'm the clinical director at Family Strategies in Mesa, Arizona, specifically. We work a lot with sex addiction and problematic sexual behavior and betrayal trauma. So a lot of my paradigm comes from that. It's not because that's the only thing that prodependence applies to. It's just where I am quite often. So the exciting news is that Rob and I are co-authoring a book to be published in 2021. We were picked up by Routledge Taylor Francis, which is very exciting. It's one of the largest publishers in the world and highly academic, which means this will be a new academic theory that will be published and put out in the world. And we're very excited about that and are working our tails off trying to get that done. And I'm excited to be a part of that project. I've sort of done the clinical application, meaning I've made it practical for like what kind of exercises and things like that we can do that are prodependence based. And so that will be largely my part in the project, will be a lot of clinical application stuff as therapist. So I am here to share some of that with you. The webinar is only as good as the questions I get, I think. Otherwise, you're just going to hear me talk, which is not very exciting. So I would encourage you to ask any question. If you are, some of you may have been here before with me, some of you may be new. But if you have questions about addiction, if you have questions about being in a relationship with an addict, if you're questioning your journey, your healing journey, where do you go from here and what do you do? And what does prodependence look like for me? And how is that different from codependence? Because it is very different, gratefully.
Yes.
Like a lot of you, I was taught about codependent healing early in my life. And I was grateful for it. It taught me a lot, but there was a lot about it that I didn't resonate with. But like a lot of people, I think we kind of picked and choose what worked and what didn't. But codependence really comes from a deficit. It's really the concept that there's something in my life that has led me or guided me to an unhealthy relationship. Or that's why I find myself in unhealthy relationships, because I have past trauma or pathology that chooses poorly. And prodependence kind of disputes that 100%. Yes, sometimes we do have our own trauma, and sometimes that does impact our choices in life. And that's something that can be looked at and worked with. And I would encourage that at some point. But prodependence really just says sometimes we love somebody or we're in relationship to somebody that struggles. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we have deep pathology that has to be analyzed and looked at. So we, and sometimes, so phones go off and so mine too. So it's no problem. So that's what prodependence is, really a strength-based, attachment-based. You know, we love people. We are wired internally to be connected to people. We're only as healthy as our most stable, connections. And so when somebody fails or they struggle, we're going to struggle. We're going to go into crisis. We're going to try and rescue, help, mitigate problems, try and stop the bleeding, so to speak. And we don't see that as sick or pathological. We see that as human. We might need to alter the way that we do that, the way we love, the way we support, but supporting and loving and wanting to help is not diagnosis. It's just because we're human. So prodependence takes a much different stance, and we're so excited about that. So that's kind of the story. It's going to be in the works here for the next year or so. So keep your fingers crossed for us and we'll get it out there. So go ahead. Sorry, Tammy.
Well, I was going to say, thank you for all of that. And please, if you've got questions, I get questions all the time. So since we don't have questions yet, I'm going to, I get questions all the time, like you were talking about, where, people are like, I love this person. And these are my words. It feels like they torment themselves for, that they've done something wrong or there's something wrong with them because they love this person or they're looking to, if they could just figure out the right thing, they could fix this person. And so all of this. So I know you work with families that are struggling often. So can you kind of talk about that paradigm? And I'm going to mute again in case my phone rings again.
Of course, I would be happy to. I think what Tammy's describing is very common. Sometimes when life blows up, you automatically start questioning. I think that's human too. Like, what part of this is mine? And could I have done something different? And maybe if I'm a partner, for instance, of somebody who's struggling with sexual compulsive behaviors, a common thought is, oh, maybe I wasn't being sexual enough, or maybe I was kind of naggy, or maybe I'm angry a lot. I've been stressed out. And, maybe if I had tried harder or been nicer or whatever, that would have changed that. And
or often the addict is saying, if you didn't nag, doing you. So,
and you might be being blamed is what you're saying. Because an addict early, when they're not in recovery or in a healthy place, they're going to want to put that on something. They're going to want to blame someone or something. And oftentimes it's the people closest. So, but that couldn't be further from the truth. As far as there's nothing anybody could do to make somebody act out in an unhealthy way. There can be dynamics in relationships that make it unhealthy inside the relationship, but that never causes somebody to act out and break promises and harm themselves and others. That's just not a thing. It's just not true. But the temptation is to, when you're the loved one, is to sit and do that and analyze. And I think it's always a good idea to think, okay, what can I do, to get healthy, and what can I do to help the relationship be as healthy as it can? But I didn't cause it. I did nothing to make it happen. I'm not going to fix it when I'm in it, and I'm not going to prevent it in the future. Those are the 3 caveats I say all the time. I didn't cause it, I can't fix it, and I'm not going to prevent it. So what are my choices is the question for most family members and partners. And that can be hard. That is really a messy place, especially early after discovery of the drug use or the alcoholism or the affairs or whatever it is. Sometimes, or you find out your children are into things you didn't know or whatever. Those can be devastating because they tear again at that connection. I'm going to not just, some of these behaviors are they are life threatening. A lot of them are. So not only am I at risk of losing, maybe even physically, someone I love, but I'm losing my connection because their first love becomes their behavior. The person they serve and love the most, or the thing they serve and love the most, is the addiction and the behaviors, and not the people around them. So that's kind of what I think Tammy's talking about, is figuring out how to get out of that loop, and get the help you need to recognize, okay, well, I just have to stay in my lane and figure out how do I heal? How do I deal with the crisis? Number one, and that's where Prodependence is a beautiful intervention, because it's a crisis not of my making. If I'm a partner, I didn't create it, but I'm having to deal with it. So what do I need to do to catch my breath, to find my feet again, to put my feet on the ground so that I can make important decisions about life, about my life, about our life together, about our family? So temptation's always to blame, and sometimes it's hard not to take that in if you're being blamed, but um, the the responsibility for that behavior lies strictly on the shoulders of the person doing it.
So we have a question. Someone shares that they had discovery in November. Sometimes I want to run away. Can I ever trust again?
I appreciate that question, and I think you're asking a question that probably many people are sitting, maybe even here on this webinar, asking the same thing. Can you ever trust again? Like, I feel like everything that I knew, everything that I had put value on and placed my trust in has kind of just been obliterated. And it's a really kind of frightening place because I'm trying to figure out again where to land. I think the easiest way to say that is I don't know, other than a lot of that will depend on your partner, the person who has caused the betrayal or has done the behavior, how committed they are to make changes and to create safety for you. In order to trust, and remember, trust takes forever to build and it takes a second to destroy. And so it's going to take time, obviously, for your person to create safety, and it's going to take, I always say, consistency over time. Say what you're going to do, what you say you're going to do, not once, but all the time. And that takes time. If I'm an addict, I'm used to gaslighting, I'm used to being dishonest, I'm used to shifting the blame to something else or someone else and making the partner, the loved one, feel crazy. So what I do know is that trust can be rebuilt. I see it all the time. But it can only be rebuilt with both people, with both people wanting that and the person who has ran the train off the tracks doing the work to put it back on.
I think
So
too, Dr. Rob talks about it will never be quite the same, you know, because you used to believe that this person would never betray you, that they had your back, and now you know that they could betray you, and you know, so trust can be rebuilt. Dr. Rob wrote Out of the Doghouse. He's got 2 different versions. It's a great book on how to rebuild trust, but it will always be a little different. You know, it can be eyes wide open. We're rebuilding this, you know, we're committed to the honesty, we're committed to the recovery path for him. And, you know, I don't like using recovery for partners just because of what Kim said, that, you know, you're not the broken one, they are. But when someone shared, and it might have been Kim, when I talked about like a wound, though, you need to heal. So it's recovering, you know, from the, you know, the deep wound that you've experienced. So, but 100% agree with Kim too. It's like, so what is he doing to rebuild your trust? You know, does he have a recovery plan? And it may not be sex addiction. It could be infidelity. You know, we don't know those details, but you know, if he's doing things that legitimately show that, you know, he is making progress and on a path, then you will see those small steps, you know, and you will start to have trust, at least in certain areas. But I know lots, and I'm sure Kim knows more than me, you know, of couples who are able to find a healing path, you know, and have trust on, you know, on many and fairly deep levels, I think, don't you?
absolutely. The caveat there, and it's true, it won't be the same. It can actually be better in some ways, and it will not be better in some ways, meaning I think one of the biggest losses that I hear partners talk about is kind of the loss of innocence, the loss of
Yes.
that like free trust that I never even doubted or I never even considered seriously this or that. And now all of a sudden I'm confronted with one of my fears. Um, and I will always have probably boundaries I didn't need before. I will always have this alertness to areas that have been injured. I tell the story often. When I was very young, I think I was 5 or 6, my mother enrolled me in piano lessons. And I was very young, but I had a teacher who had a front yard that was gated, but she had 2 Dobermans that were family pets, and they were lovely dogs with their family. But they didn't like strangers or didn't like me this particular day, but it had a long sidewalk from her door to the gate to get out of the front yard. And I got about halfway to that gate and those dogs came and luckily they pulled them off of me, but I did get bit and they attacked me. And I love dogs. I have dog, but I am very, and I'm not afraid of dogs, but I am very aware when dogs are around me that I don't know, that don't know me. I can feel an awareness inside of me that probably wouldn't have been there had I not experienced that as a young child. And I'm fairly older and I still have that in me. And it's not a dislike. I don't dream about it every night. I don't have nightmares about it, but I am very alert. And I think that's what recovery and this healing path looks like for couples who make it through, is they have this alertness that we have a risk in our marriage we have to be extra careful of. And I'm aware that I've been injured before and I'm going to take precautions sometimes. So that's the best way I can, that's how I relate. That's a story that really resonates for me. Maybe it's helpful.
Oh, absolutely. I was thinking it absolutely resonates. I'm sorry that that happened to you. It had to be
Thank you.
terrifying. And, but yeah, that, you know, that hyper awareness is, you know, makes a lot of sense. And the naivete, you know, the innocence that you talked about, yeah, that's gone. You know, like, you know, we said I do, and, or whatever, but, and, you know, we're always going to be this one. No, it's not. There's, you know, this has been shattered, but, you know, the pieces can be reconstructed. There's still going to be the super glue, you know, for the pieces, but, you know, I know lots of couples that, you know, that can find healing. Not everybody, but they
Nope.
can. So next question. Today I had a severe trauma attack. I am so sorry, but I'm so glad you are here. Although the contact with the problem spouse has stopped, I'm still suffering from his behavior and the betrayal. I am learning about the brain more and more, his and mine. It is proven that the brain with disorder works differently than that damage from a normal functioning brain with empathy and so on. Is this normal that the effects can be so huge while the person is not in my life anymore?
The short answer to that is yes. Trauma, even though you have removed, in this case, the threat of that relationship and future hurt is no longer there, depending on the level of betrayal and the impact on the person who, in this case, the impact on you is unfortunately something that now I get. It's like a gift that I got that I don't want, right? So yes, that can keep going. And regardless if you stay in the relationship or not, it, to me, is just a testament that continued work as far as healing myself and getting the help I need, because it can morph into pretty severe PTSD symptoms, even if that threat is no longer there. And we have such wonderful treatments and capabilities to heal that. As a therapist that works with trauma, we have modalities, just tons of modalities. I love EMDR. That's a very, for this type of thing, can be a very good modality. It can take less time than some of the others. If you're not familiar with that, I would really recommend a therapist who has specialty in betrayal trauma and also EMDR, so they can navigate and help you walk through, because trauma it kind of lodges itself in parts of your brain and doesn't want to leave. And so there's certain modalities that will help kind of push that through so you can continue your healing path. But it is not unusual at all.
Well, and even if you do trauma work, it doesn't erase it. It just doesn't have the same effect. So, because I've had EMDR, and so now when I see some, you know, when that same trauma stuff would come up, like I can view it, but I don't get the, you know, I mean, I used to have the physical, you know, the gut clenching, you know, halt, you know, kind of reaction to it, and you know, now it's just like, you know, I mean, so I still see it, and I know it's there, but it's not. It just doesn't carry the emotional weight, and it can't so negatively impact me. So you clearly had something that you can identify as triggering. Well, anyway, that's what I'm reading. So I would love to have you get some, specific help around that, just to minimize the emotional and physical effect of it, for you.
I often say too, you'll notice in some of the prodependent writing in the future, you'll see that we even don't use triggers as often with partners.
Thank you.
I use just because I think it can't trigger really resonates for most people. Like something happens and it literally triggers emotions or thoughts or physical response. I use activate a lot because I feel like that's kind of what happens for partners and loved ones is I have this underlying experience and it's like something happens and it kind of lights the fire. It activates that trauma. And I think what Tammy's saying is very true. It doesn't, that experience will always be part of the fabric of your life, whether you stay in the relationship or move on, but it doesn't have to have the emotional power. So I can look at it and I might even get sad. I might even go, oof, oh, that was hard. I'm so glad I'm not there anymore. And that doesn't mean you haven't worked through trauma. That to me is just life. But if it has this grip, I think that you used a trauma attack, which tells me it had a big physiological impact, then there might be still a little bit of work you can do there. So I would really recommend a qualified, good therapist that does that kind of work.
This is one I have not heard about. Someone shared, I had image retracing, and that was really beneficial to me. I see the images now without the pain in my stomach, and I would recommend it. Are you familiar with that modality?
I am not very familiar with it. I've heard of it. I think that's a little bit, I think it's a little bit of an imagery kind of, I don't know, but if it's a modality that works, yay.
Yes.
Do it. Yes. It sounds interesting. I should do some reading up about that.
Yeah, I'm fascinated. I actually will also read up about it, because anything that, like you're sharing, anything that, takes away the pain in the stomach. And I mean, like I said, I knew when I was having that reaction, because it was my body was there before my mind even caught up, so very activated. And thank you for, I forget about that word, and I try to remember, but I forget.
Oh, no, it's good.
Yeah, no, but it's a whole different vocabulary, really trying to change the language. So the next one is, I'm finding it very difficult to know when to call it quits. 5 years since D-Day, partner sober and in recovery, but I feel I don't have capacity for this anymore. Any books you might recommend for this stage, or advice?
That's a really good question. It sounds like I've said this before. I don't mean to be repetitious, but maybe I think sometimes it's hard to quantify how much a person can deal, how much they can stay, even if somebody's in recovery. A partner who has made these choices is in recovery, in this case sober and doing what they're supposed to do. It has a tremendous impact. Even the healing process it takes time and energy and a lot of work, and it takes a chunk out of somebody's life, and sometimes people don't want to stay. They don't want to live with that risk anymore. And I can really understand. I hear a lot of partners say, I don't know when to say I'm done. Like I'm grateful that he or she is better and doing their thing, but I just don't know if I can keep walking this road. I'm tired. I think that's such a very personal choice, though. As far as books and things that that I would recommend anything that has to do with post-traumatic growth. There's a lot of great writing and research on post-traumatic growth. I apologize, I can't think of like an author right off the top of my head. I wish I had Dr. Rob's recall. You can recall. But post-traumatic growth is kind of, where do I go from here? Now I know I'm on the other side of maybe those big trauma responses, but I have been walking and drudging and trudging on this road for a really, really long time. Does that mean I stay? And if I stay, can I recoup some of that energy and can I find parts of those myself that feels lost in all of that, or do I need to move on? I think sometimes partners feel a little bit guilty, like, gosh, he or she did all this work and got better, but it was too much for me. I talk about the plimsoll line on a boat. Every boat has its load limit. It's called the plimsoll line, how much weight it can take on before it starts taking on water. And I think everybody reaches that at different points. And it's sometimes hard to admit, like, I went through all this and I I still don't, I don't feel happy. I don't know if this is my path. And that's a really hard thing to come to terms with. But post-traumatic growth work, also maybe some more additional exploration on me. If I was working with a client in that situation, I would probably start really like, where do you see your life, in the next five? Let's start doing some vision work on where I see my life. And does that include this partner or not? And if not, what does that look like for me? Sometimes even just looking at that plan B and giving it a voice might be enough to recognize I want to stay, or it might be enough to recognize it's time for me to move forward.
I was thinking the visioning, like if a year from now you're on the same path, what does that look like for you? Is that an okay thing, or or is it like, oh my gosh, I can't even fathom, so, and not everybody's supposed to be together. I mean, I love it when couples want to heal, but, ultimately the person that you were married to, lied, cheated, all of those things. And even if they're on a different path, they're kind of a different person. So, it isn't a failure for you, is what I guess what I'm going to. It isn't a failure for you if you go, this is just not, what I envisioned for the, next 20 years of my life or whatever, So I think that's what I just don't want you to guilt about it, which would be really easy to do. Oh, this person worked so hard and here I am bailing. No, you're making a choice. And I hope that's what it is. At the end of the day, at some point you go, I've made a choice to stay or to go. And Kim has used this before too. If it's a good choice today, it's a good choice tomorrow, So it isn't that you have to, but that also can be a little bit of, that's just to not react. But it also could be then a year passes and you're still in the should I stay or go. So maybe you find some trusted people, a good therapist to talk to about this, and what's practical for me is making lists, like pros and cons. I mean, it's old fashioned, but pros and cons. There's some basic things of, like that just helps cement in my mind, where I'm at and what things might look like. So
I love those ideas. I think one other idea that I do this in my own life, I literally sit down and do vision boards for me, and for projecting outward, like whether it's a year from now, 5 years from now, whatever that looks like, but I'll just do like a collage of everything that looks interesting to me that I want to do in this next chapter of my life. And as you really sit down and let your mind just ideas flow, then look at that and say, are these things I want to do in this relationship? Would this relationship have space for these things or not? I also want to validate 5 years of hard work. That took a tremendous amount of courage, of this healing process, going through and watching a partner recover from an addiction, and then holding space for that, and while figuring out how to mend my own heart. That takes a tremendous amount of courage. So often I say that to people doing this work. I think I work with the most magnificent people on the planet. I feel so blessed to rub shoulders with them, because I think it takes true grit and courage to look inward and to look at a relationship and to hold space for that, and to watch somebody try and heal and go back and forth. That just is, it's tough. And whether or not you stay in the relationship, I would also really take inventory of what I've learned. I love Viktor Frankl. He talks a lot about creating meaning out of our suffering, and it really resonates for me. I feel like my work I do as a therapist is the way I create meaning out of my stories, good, bad, and otherwise in my life. And I think when we can create meaning to them, we can live with them. We can put them someplace that won't haunt us. And whether that is, wow, I learned how to be more empathic, or I learned more about my needs and wants and how to get those met. I learned about what I don't want in a companion. I learned about, I learned how to see people more wounded instead of good and bad and so black and white. There's so many lessons in this process of healing. And I think that's how we live joyfully. I think that's how we find peace, even with some of the hardest things that we can go through.
Yeah. And, that all resonated with me as well. And I hope, I hope that you've healed, as you're taking this inventory, you see that you're not just reacting. The D-Day didn't happen and you went, I'm out. And, this has been a process and you've really stuck in there. So if you choose to leave, you've done, I'm sure you're in a way different place than you would have been 5 years ago. So it would be from a place of information and choice rather than a reaction. So the next question, my husband is in recovery, yay. Oh, so I feel like I can't complain. But he keeps using the things he's learned against me, like pointing out when I don't use I statements. He reminds me of where I fit. I'm sorry. He reminds me of where I fit on Pia Melody's codependency chart, almost as if to tell me that I'm half of the equation in this addiction reality. How would you recommend I respond to this?
That's hard and not okay. From a recovery standpoint, we have to stay in our own lane. So sometimes recovery can get weaponized. I've heard that. There's so many great tools to recovery and so many things we learn, whether we're the addict healing or, in recovery or the partner healing. And I say, just like any tool, it can build something beautiful and it can rip a hole in something. So it sounds like it's a little bit weaponized. I probably wouldn't be open to that kind of conversation. I, of course, do not subscribe to Pia Melody's codependency list. Particularly, I don't know what he means by that, but you are not half of the equation of addiction. You are 0% of the equation of his addiction. And that might be his way of, Dr. Rob always says, this is like the last final frontier. Prodependence took any excuse from the addict away to blame anyone. And that can be a little bit painful, but, people who are struggling with addiction have to own the whole thing or they can't heal. They can blame, they can shift that responsibility as much as they want, but as often as they do that, they won't heal. So you are not any percentage of his addiction at all, no matter what he or she says. I'm assuming it's a he. So he or she says, you are only responsible for your own safety, your own healing, your own ability to meet your needs and wants, your own truth, honesty, vulnerability. That's all we have responsibility for. So this is one of the reasons why codependency is so painful. The idea that I have some sort of part in the dysfunction of the addiction, not the relationship, the addiction is not true. And if I am doing things in the relationship that aren't being helpful, I might be very creative about that, but not helpful, then I might need to recalibrate that. I might need to look and say, well, I'm trying to love him or her like this or this, but it's not working. It's actually not working. So I might need to recalibrate the way I love and support and change that up a little bit, but that doesn't mean that I'm codependent. This doesn't.
That was so diplomatic. Because I was like, I know what I would do. I'd take the Prodependence book and I'd probably toss it at him. Throw might have happened too. So, but now that Kim has talked, I've calmed down a little bit. So I would invite you to give him a copy of Prodependence and have him read it. I would invite you to listen to the Prodependence podcast. And I'll put the link on in a moment on sex and relationship healing. And I would invite you both to listen to Dr. Stan Tatkin's We Do, where it talks about we and how we need to, it's a great, even for non-addicts, it's such, anybody who's in a relationship, I go, you should listen, actually I don't say should, I try really not to use shoulds. I invite them, say, this is a really interesting podcast and it's got nothing to do specifically with addiction. It just talks about relationships and how if it's if it's just me, and if it's all just and I'm not putting what's best for our relationship, I can be real selfish and like, I want this and me, or I can go, gosh, this is better for our relationship. And if the goal is to have a good relationship where the two of us are way stronger against the world than one of us, that seems like a worthwhile goal. So what can I do for that? So I would invite you to share Prodependence, the book. It's like Rob says, he makes about 12 cents on them, but it's such a good book. He shares it when he does a lecture with the guys that are at Seeking Integrity Los Angeles about prodependence, and how, look, this person, if they're in a relationship, this person loves you despite how broken you are, and he says invariably these guys are crying because they finally, for some of them, finally get a clue that, it isn't all about me. It's, this person is here. They've stuck through all the junk. I'll be kind. All the junk that I put them through, they're still here. They still see something in me despite the brokenness, and they're still here. So there's lots of ways, but yes, I loved what Kim talked about, having a healthy boundary around that kind of behavior would probably keep me from tossing a book at somebody. But anyway, I will put a link for the podcast too. But if for those of you, if you have not plugged into the podcast, Kim has one on there too. But the podcast series is great. And, so check those out. There's several on Prodependence specifically, but the Dr. Stan Tatkin, Tatkin, on the sex, love, and addiction. I listen to all of them. I'm a couple behind again right now, but I've listened to almost all of them, and that one just is probably the one I quote the most, just because it's so useful to remember. If I'm in a relationship, we is much stronger than just me. So
yeah,
hopefully that's helpful.
Nice.
And now you're gonna have this recorded. You can even play this for them. So
good.
And he can be mad at me, so I'm okay with that. Okay, so this person says, my husband has a CSAT since last June post-discovery. I have a non-CSAT but trauma-sensitive therapist since last May, pre-most recent discovery. That means there's been multiple. Okay, there have been many discoveries over the past years, 35-year marriage, multiple times in couples therapy, some individual, but this is the first time fully admitting addiction, preparing for disclosure, trying to determine how to coordinate individual and couples therapy. We haven't started couples therapy yet. Also wondering if I should pull in a CSAT for disclosure. Husband's Counseling Center has a CSAT and couples counseling available, but I've heard they have a no secrets policy, so their counselors can share with each other over the individual and couples information. Is that standard policy for this type of work? With my current therapist, I feel confident that she has my best interests as a priority and will not be sharing anything that I share with her, even though she is communicating with my husband's CSAT. Any advice on this is appreciated. Thanks. This is a great question. Thanks so much. We get lots of questions about disclosure, etc. So yeah. Kim, kind of unpack that for us, please.
I'll do my best.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm really glad you have a good therapist that you feel like you can trust and is sensitive to the trauma that you've been through. And I don't think that a therapist necessarily has to be a CSAT to work with a betrayed partner. CSATs typically have a standard of training that is pretty high. They have a lot of understanding. So I want to answer the first question about disclosure. Pulling in a CSAT, I don't think you necessarily have to do that, but I would want to make sure that your therapist had training in formal disclosure. No matter, they could be the most wonderful therapist, but if they don't there's a very specific way that disclosure is done that will cause the least amount of harm and will help create safety in that process for the couple. So it might not be a bad idea if she does not have that training or that understanding, either for her to get training or maybe just to have a CSAT therapist who does know how to do that. If you, even just for that, even just for the disclosure, you could have that. And if the counseling center has that available, they could probably help you navigate how to see that therapist just and prepare you for disclosure, because there's a definite preparation for both the addict and the partner for that disclosure process. And it takes a little bit of time. It could take a few visits to help, get ready for that and know what to do. About the no secrets policy, that is pretty standard for couples work in this situation. And I wouldn't say it's no secret so the therapist can share every single detail that the other person, like if I was working with a partner, I would never go to the addict's therapist and be like, hey, I want to tell you everything the partner said. I would never do that. The no secrets is more about not holding secrets about affairs or acting out behaviors, because then the therapist becomes part of the lie. So the therapist won't feel very trustworthy if he or she knows, oh, well, the husband's been talking to me about these 4 other affairs while he's, we can't hold secrets because we become part of the addiction, the problem of addiction. So the secret holding is more about those big things, not about my emotions. And if you show up to your therapist and say, I just really hate him or her today, she's not going to, that therapist should not run to the other therapist and say, hey, under the no secrets policy, she hates him right now. That would not be best practice for therapists. So I hope that makes sense. Tammy, maybe you can help me there a little bit.
No, I think you're doing great. So, and she also asked about a couples therapy and timing for all of that.
I think couples therapy, the therapist should be able to help you. We generally don't do couples therapy for the first, and there's no exact time, but for the first initial stages with our couples in the program we do, it usually takes about a year to a year and a half sometimes before, and it doesn't mean we don't do some couples work. We may pull the couple together to give them tools to communicate, to boundaries to create safety, how to check in, slips, those kind of things that are more logistical that create safety in the coupleship. But the deep, like emotional work, what we would call the reattachment phases of marriage therapy, have to happen when when the partner who's been betrayed has some hold on, understanding, has done some healing around the trauma, and can re-engage or decides if he or she wants to re-engage in the relationship and reattach, and the addict has arrested the behaviors that are causing pain. Otherwise, the marital counseling just becomes, round 1 and 2 and 3. It just becomes a boxing ring, and it doesn't accomplish anything but cause more pain. So we don't, you're working on the marriage or the relationship by doing your individual work, by kind of vicariously, but then bringing the couple together, both have to be in a pretty stable place for it to be effective.
Yeah. And, and so first of all, I'm glad you're here. Second of all, I'm so sorry that, that's a long time, and to be, on the roller coaster. So I'm glad you have a therapist you trust. I'm glad he's working with CSAT, and I hope he's on a recovery path, and, and you both, can be on a different journey from here. So.
Right. And also grab that Prodependence book, give it to your therapist.
Yes.
I'm sorry, but I'm saying that to everybody because most therapists, I would say 99.999 are just so grateful to have the information. And if it resonates for you and you give it to them and say, I need to be looked at like this. I don't want to be looked at as sick and part of the problem. And I want to be seen as somebody who trusted, and then her trust was broken. And I want to be seen as somebody in a crisis that I didn't create. But I want help navigating that crisis.
So I can't imagine living without the spouse 15 years, but after 3 years working on myself and seeing little to no change with the spouse and knowing it is a brain disorder, it's really giving up on the toxic hope. How does Prodependence look at this? Have not read the book yet.
Really good question. So the addict is more of a brain injury than a brain disorder. I just want to correct that. A brain disorder would indicate it's unfixable. Luckily, what happens with addiction is it injures the reward centers of the brain, but it can be repaired. It's just not easy. It's, luckily our brain's very fixable that way. We can repair neural pathways and create new ones even late into our life. So as far as not seeing change and doing all the work for 3 years, that would be very frustrating. If you feel like I'm just repeating patterns and this person's not getting better, which I think that's probably what you meant about the brain disorder. Like it's not repair, I'm not seeing a difference. I'm not seeing a change. It seems, and we say this all the time, addiction is a chronic mental issue. It's chronic because it persists because of that injury to the reward center. So I think that as far as prodependence and how we would see it, it would be just a validation that, you know, you want to attach to somebody who's not healing, and you're left kind of with these loose wires, like I want to connect, I want to feel safe with, I want to enjoy my life. I don't want to worry about what you're doing when I'm not with you, and when I'm not, and when you're alone at work, and when you're on the phone, and when you're alone in the room. Like I don't want to worry about that anymore. And you may be, you may be reaching a line, the Plimsoll line I talked about earlier, where it's starting to become too painful for you to wait for. And that, as painful as it is okay. It's okay. It's okay to admit that. And Prodependence would say, do what you need to do for you. And if that means keep working at it and keep pushing through and trying to connect and hoping that, and some addicts take a lot longer than others. I don't know why. I think it's the depth, how long it's been going on, the depth of the behaviors. There's a whole bunch of things that contribute to the longevity and the persistence of the addiction and the addictive behaviors. But it may have ran its course with you, or at least right now you might feel really frustrated and maybe you need a break. That might be something where I might say, maybe I need a therapeutic separation for a while, to just do me for a while and see, like, do I, like, it is kind of getting that focus away from my life. Do I have more air in my lungs? Can I breathe better? Can I function better without being in it? And it's non-committal. That doesn't mean it's a first step to divorce or to ending the relationship, but it might give you, I would always recommend those kind of separations. Obviously they're therapeutic, so they need the help of a therapist. I do those quite frequently just to stop the bleeding, kind of to get the addict to a place where he or she is doing recovery for them, and for the partner to be able to get out from under all of that stress all the time, and to be able to self-regulate a little bit better and take care of themselves a little bit better, and kind of with a set amount of time, see how that goes, revisit it and see. It's just one of those options to maybe consider.
And, and I, like we talked about visioning before, I would invite you to vision multiple next chapters. Like if you're writing a book, which you're writing your life, vision, if I write the chapter with him, what would it look like? Vision, if I write the chapter differently, what would it look like? And I also think it's really easy, you say toxic hope, and I don't think I've heard that term before. And I hate using toxic with hope. But I can tell, I mean, that gives me a specific vision of how you're feeling, is like that it's not okay for me to continue to hope that, he's eventually going to get better. But I also think for me, having a clear, like not putting the rosy glasses on of, it was so wonderful, but having the realistic vision of what we've had, the good and the bad. I mean, nothing is all good or nothing is all bad, but if there's, they go, well, we had this and this was really great, but then there's this, but I think, having a better indication of really what your relationship was, I think that will help guide you too, as to, like, are you, and you may be, when you're imagining not the inability to not live without him, are you imagining it, in the reality of what you've had? I have no way of knowing. I'm just, I'm very pragmatic. Can you tell? I'm very pragmatic. I look at things as like, let's write it down. Let's figure it out. So,
I love it.
Yeah. Okay. Next one. My husband has completed inpatient treatment for porn sex addiction, and so far has been consistent with his aftercare and seems to have a genuine desire to see it through and work on himself. We are both committed to trying to make our marriage work. I've been reading up on recovery, and I understand it will take a long time for him to repair his internal issues and eventually become the attentive, empathetic, intimate husband I would like him to be. I am striving to use this in-between time to work on myself and love myself more and look for alternative ways to have my emotional needs met that he hasn't been meeting for a long time. Can you talk about good ways for partners of recovering addicts to focus on meeting their own emotional needs in a way that doesn't detach them from the relationship, but has realistic expectations of what their addict spouse can and cannot provide for them during early stages of recovery? Great question. Thank you.
Very good question. And okay, so yes, I can talk about that. I love that. I think that's probably my favorite thing to talk about. Talk about is, meeting our needs, how to get needs met in a healthy way without completely, the old codependency model would say detach with love. Just do you. I don't know how many times I've heard that in my lifetime. Thousands probably. Detaching with love is just really not a thing, because we can't work on attachment outside of the relationship. We can't work on figuring out healthy attachment when we're not taking some risk there. So, that's kind of the caveat to that. And like we said earlier, we're meant for attachment and connection. So the stage you're talking about, early stages of recovery, I think the biggest piece on meeting emotional needs that you can't get met within the relationship due to the addiction and the long term, having gone or maybe fallen into a deficit that way over the years within the relationship. I think there is about 1,000,001 ways. One of the best ways is to connect with other people who are in a similar situation, who can maybe give you ideas about what they do. I think the biggest thing is I want to stay grounded and healthy. And I want to, there's oftentimes temptations to retaliate in a variety of ways for partners, but it always ends up hurting, the partner more, and the relationship, it injures it further. So, really being able to connect with others. And I think that's probably the biggest piece that will meet emotional needs, is because there's such attachment injuries to the relationship due to addiction. I need to have people in my life I can create solid and healthy attachments with, that can hold space for me to be angry, to be happy, to be loving, to be bitchy, to be whatever it is I need to be, and still love me and still stay with me and not abandon me like I've maybe experienced in the marriage, in the relationship. I think that's huge. I think focusing on very basic needs, also a good therapist if you don't have one, but focusing on basic needs. This is a crisis. It's kind of and so I always say recalibrating and balancing the very basic areas of my life is the number one thing. Like, I need to really look at my physical needs. How am I getting those met? Sleep, eating, grooming, exercise, anything that has to do with my body. Am I being deliberate and intentional about those every day? How am I getting my spiritual needs met, whatever those look like? How am I connecting with a higher power or something greater than me? Or am I feeling inspired towards my inner self, my inner spiritual self? And that could be a variety of things, whether it's got a religious tenet to it, or if it's just connecting with nature, however that looks. I think relationally, we have to establish healthy relationships, and we have to nurture those relationships in healthy ways. And then I think we have to do we have to be aware, what hobbies have I lost? What interests, what things have I lost in the midst of all of this that I need to start nurturing again? Do I like to read? Am I a cook? Am I like to garden? Do I like to am I a hiker? Do I like to run marathons? What is my thing that maybe I have given up, or what are the things that I have given up in order to try and maybe I've been stressed, maybe I've been trying to fix or trying to stop the pain in the relationship. And now I have an understanding that I can't really do that. All I can do is work on the crisis and take care of myself and figure out what boundaries I need, um, and not beat myself up for being in a relationship with somebody who has this struggle, because it's not my fault. I need people in my life who can keep reiterating that. I know I feel like I'm babbling, but there are so many great things. I know Tammy probably has 50 million more, but I think it sounds like you're in a really good space. The question you asked, even the way you asked the question tells me you're on track. You're getting it. Like, I've got to figure this out for myself, and hopefully he'll continue to do his work. Either way, I'm going to come out strong. I'm going to come out, I'm going to come out with a lot of understanding, and I might have just a whole bunch of new friends and ways to cope with stress that I didn't have before.
Yeah, I mean, I ditto on all of those. And I put a link to the previously recorded. John Taylor has some really good relationship, on practical and pragmatics. And he's like, these four things, and in negotiating the relationship, even, the conflict and, stepping away for 20 minutes. I mean, there's a lot of really good content in there. And on top of what all the great suggestions Kim had, I thought, not just things that you've abandoned, that got lost in the mist, but are there things that you've been intrigued with? I went to a ceramics, one of those paint a pot stores, and did a ceramics thing, and I had a great time, and that would have been something, that I would have not made time for, because whatever. So are there things, right now we're not doing anything except online, but is there a class that you'd like to take because you'd like to learn more about? I mean, are there things in you that you'd like to explore more, that you can make other friendships and other connections? And I think all of those things are really good. I hike, I run, I do those things. Physical exercise for me is very balancing and and helps me. But you're on this platform on Sunday night. There's a Betrayed Partner drop-in group. I would highly encourage you to join that. It's at 6 p.m. Pacific time. There's another one on Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. We may add a few extra, during this time when nobody can go anyplace. We'll see. But keep plugging into this stuff. It's really glad that you are both committed to just continuing to explore what the path has. So.
And don't forget to also, Matt Wheeler, a colleague of mine, does Prodependence for Couples every other Friday, the same time. And he gives some really practical advice on, I think, with coupleship stuff too, that is really helpful from a prodependent place. EFT, he's an EFT specialist, emotionally focused therapy, and that's kind of the gold standard for also how to hold on. Prodependence talks about holding on to the good things in the relationship that are right, while working through the parts that are wounded. And I love that. Like, you don't have to totally be like, you go over there, fix you, I'll go over here and fix me. But there are some things. What are our commonalities as a couple? Do we have a family together? Do we have hobbies we enjoy? Do we like going to the drag races? Like, do we like golfing? What do we like? Like, those are the things we want to nurture, but still acknowledge there's still areas here that are really wounded that we have to keep working on. That's one of my favorite things about Prodependence, and why I think it is a perspective that will cause real possibility for healing if couples want that.
So we're almost out of time, but I want to, one last question. I thought he was Superman. He was everything I wanted, needed. Now I'm mourning that relationship. That man is now in therapy. I can still find him attractive, but I don't know who this man is now. I know he's trying so hard to be a better man, partner, his words, but I don't know him now or trust him. I think I would be better alone, and I can't see me having a relationship again. Please don't give up on all relationships. I understand that's where you are right now, but
it just shows how much hurt that you've experienced by somebody that you really, that let you down, that you really had a lot of faith and trust in. And I think most partners can resonate with that. I know that's where you are, and I want to honor where you are, because that's okay to be there. I don't think it will last. And the reason I say that is because, like I said earlier, we're wired to take this risk. We really are, but you don't have to take it before you're ready. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. And I think that they are a different person. I think recovery and this changes everybody, like we talked about earlier. It will not ever be the same, but your heart will heal. If you're intentional about it and you want it, it will heal. And there will most likely be a time where, whether within inside this relationship or another one, that you'll want to connect again. It might not be marriage. It might not be, I'm not saying it looks the same for everyone, but we're only as healthy as our closest attachments, but we always run the risk of betrayal, not just marital betrayal or intimate betrayal, but because we're people and we're fallible. I would rather take the day of love, or 2 or 3 or 10, and risk the betrayal for the love, because it's so powerful and I can tell you had real love. And that's why the hurt is so real and so big. So I wouldn't make any decisions while I'm in pain about anything. While I'm in crisis, that we always say that as therapists, no big decisions. Because you'll want to clear that before you make any big decisions. Remember, a good idea today, it'll be a good idea tomorrow. And hang with it, hang with you, take good care of you and that heart. And that's what we're all doing. We're all taking risk every day. And I hear that. So stay with it and keep trying. It's a worthy desire to want love and to want trust and to want connection.
And I agree. And I've been, I'm human. I fail people and people fail me. I'm sorry, you've got me teared up. But I have thought with every relationship, that somebody's hurt me, it was worth it because the connections, and like, they couldn't hurt me if I didn't care, and I don't want to be so insulated and protected that, that I don't care. I'm willing to be wounded from time to time because, at the end of the day, the stuff, it doesn't matter. The connections I have with people, that's what's, that's all I care about. That's what I really value. So please don't completely give up on that. That breaks my heart. So anyway, okay, now I'm tearing.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Kim, so much for
Yes.
being here. Thank you all for joining on today, and we'll see you the first week of April.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for your questions. Please come back, and I will see you in 2 weeks. And please take care and stay safe and stay healthy, and find lots of fun things to do in your house.
Yeah, thanks. Take
Bye, you
care.
guys.
Bye-bye.